Divya Ghatak, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you, John.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Budapest. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the viability of hybrid work models and leadership approaches to sustain operational efficiency and team morale. You're joining us from Budapest. However, you're usually located in California. So
Right.
you're joining us after a long journey. So thank you so much for taking the time after that long flight to really sit down and just have this really great conversation with us. As we get started, I wanted to share Divya's bio with everybody. Divya Ghatak is the Chief People Officer at Sentinel One, leading the organization's people talent foundation and workplace functions. She has enabled the company's hypergrowth and expansion plans while strengthening an amazing company culture through purposeful hiring that prioritizes talent, experience, diversity, and culture fit for all candidates. Prior to Sentinel One, Divya was Global VP of People at Nevro and CPO at Good Data. She has also held global HR leadership roles at a variety of tech companies, including Cisco and Tavant. Divya received her master's in human resource management and personnel administration from Tata Institute of Social Science and her Bachelor of Arts in economics with honors from Delhi University. I could go on. There's so many really great things about your background. But before I launch us into the conversation, anything else you would like to share by way of your background or personal context? And then we'll get started.
No, John, I think you covered it pretty well. Just an absolute honor to be here and talking about, some very exciting key topics.
Excellent. Well, why don't we start? I mean, I think it's somewhat fitting as we launch into this conversation that you're joining us from Budapest. I'm here in the Salt Lake City area. You're normally in California, and in
Right,
fact, we have diverse distributed teams that are
right.
from all different parts of the country, all different parts of the world. And we're talking about hybrid work models. We're talking about the opportunity to have distributed teams and what that can mean for operational efficiencies, team morale, et cetera. Tell us a little bit more about the model there at Sentinel One and how you're approaching things as chief people officer.
Happy to. It is, you rightly pointed, John, it's the sign of times, right? We have globally distributed teams, and technology enables us to connect real time with each other. We've certainly learned a lot of lessons in pandemic in the sense that work did not stop. In fact, people got more into their workplaces and more into meetings and less able to focus on well-being and all of that. So there are a lot of pros and cons of working through remote only or in person only. And I do think a hybrid model is the right one. It allows us to be situational. It allows us to
Mhm.
take benefits from both the remote only and in person only models. And as long as you're clear on what you're trying to solve for from an employee connection, well being, and impact perspective, I think that's the right conversation to have rather than which model is suited one way or the other. And there is definitely a lot of goodness in bringing people together in person. We are here in Budapest with a partner conference. We also have a leadership learning program for our high potential leaders from around the world that we are bringing together in person. This is the second year of doing that. And last year, people were just blown away by just the experience of coming together and attending a program like that in person, right? So, pros and cons, our approach is definitely hybrid and a lot of
Mhm.
lessons along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this conversation's happening amidst, increased calls from some CEOs, across sectors, across industries, for return to office mandates, right? So we have more and more organizations that even those organizations where CEOs have said, we're going to be continuing to have remote or hybrid work options indefinitely. So a year or two ago, they would have said, you can work from home as long as you want. And now they've pulled a 180 and they're saying, no, return to office mandates, everyone has to come back. Or some variation, maybe they're saying, if you choose to stay home, we're going to cap like how far you can advance. Like everyone needs to come back. If you choose to stay home, you can only advance to this rung in our progression scheme in the organization.
Right,
And
right.
so those types of mandates, it's really interesting to me, especially for those leaders who have pulled that 180 amidst all of the evidence that we have that shows that hybrid work models can work really well. All the evidence that shows how they can increase productivity, all the evidence that shows certainly that people want them, from a sentiment standpoint, from
Right.
a perception standpoint, but also the hard kind of business metrics, the hard outcomes based evidence. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Happy to, John. So I do think that, learning the lessons that we did during the pandemic, where you could make, a hybrid model succeed, is super, super important. And the key word is hybrid. That does not mean that you continue to operate remotely. That means that you do have a balance of in-person and remote, right? So in all the areas, for example, where we have a large office presence, we have employees coming in on an average 2 to 3 times a week to the
Hmm.
office. There are many locations we operate from where we don't have an office, and the choice is to work remotely. So there are two things we've done in those locations. One, we've worked with co-working spaces to have employees get together on a regular basis in person
Hmm.
in those co-working spaces. The other advantage is that the huge cost that companies put into brick and mortar buildings is actually being diverted into well-being and impact and connection initiatives where
Hmm.
employees can come together for the purpose of connection, right? So it's very, very interesting how some of those budgets are flowing, because there is no doubt that you need to invest in your employee experience. You do need to provide for that connection. You do need to, think about wellness in the way that meets the needs of the modern family or the modern knowledge worker. And I've actually seen those, shifts from investing in a massive way in brick and mortar buildings to really embracing this hybrid model, really embracing the needs of the future for the modern family or the modern knowledge worker. So it's interesting, give and take.
Yeah, it is. Well, and you bring up the brick and mortar. I think it's fantastic that many organizations are pivoting, as leases are coming up and they're able to get out of those lease agreements, so they're not locked in anymore to the brick and mortar as much as they were, say, in the past. But it's interesting too, like part of the argument that many organizations are making when they say return to office mandates are necessary is they're saying, hey, we got this big building, we need
Right.
everyone to come back. And I'm like, that is such a sunk cost fallacy. Like, why?
I know, I know. It's not the right reason, right?
That's
That's
definitely not the right
exactly right.
reason.
You should come back to solve, like, what is the problem we are trying to solve here, right? So in my mind, again, I do feel that if you don't meet your co-workers in person on a regular basis, there is definitely that loss of connection and that loss of, how much you could accelerate your conversation if you met the person in person. Now, does that mean that you need to go into an office space? Well, even if you went to an office space, chances are that your teammates are located in different parts of the world, right? Because the way teams are evolving, it's not just an intact team in one location. You do have multi-location, multi-functional teams that are coming together. So if you're trying to solve for teams coming together, it may not be solved by brick and mortar. It will be more solved by intentional experiences where you bring people together to solve problems. In our case, another really great application was actually in the area of giving back to the community. So we have our foundation that gives back to the community, and we launched this program called S1 Cares, where our people come together in a location to give back, and they spend the whole day together. And we've had About 500 sentinels participate in that, over 40 cities in the world. And the result has been outstanding in terms of the connection they formed, how good they felt about, leaving their community in a better space, and how teams got together. And sometimes when people are visiting and they know there's a S1 Cares event, they'll make time on their calendar to do it. So there are different intentional ways where we need to bring these global teams together. And obviously, solving business problems is one, team building is a second, but giving back to the community is also very interesting from the recent events that we've had, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's lots of good reasons to bring people together. Um, there's some dumb reasons to say we need to bring people together, like sunk cost fallacies of saying we have all these big buildings and we have these expenses, so I guess we need to bring people back together. That's a really dumb reason. Um, I think another dumb reason is simply, you know, you have perhaps leaders from an older generation or leaders who don't know how to manage a hybrid team. And so they're just like, I don't know how to do that. So I need everyone to come back so that I can lead the way that I'm used to. I think that is a really silly approach. We're moving into the future, and you need to up your game. You need to reskill. You need to upskill. You need to learn how to approach the new world of leadership. And if you don't know how to hack it, then that's something you need to deal with. That's not something you need to push upon everyone on your team, right? Through a return to office
100%.
mandate.
100%. I do
Yeah.
think, though, that when you look at your early in career professionals, I feel that I think they are the most impacted, because there is
Yeah.
definitely a lot to learn when you're early in your career in terms of how you engage with coworkers, how you imbibe from, just colleagues sitting next to you and, walking over and, asking those questions, which you then translate to a hybrid environment. So I do feel that for earlier in career resources, it's very, very important to have that experience. I think I benefited from that, for majority of my career. And even now, when I'm in California, I do go into a brick and mortar office. I personally enjoy that as well, but I'm typically on Zoom for 80% of my day because I'm talking to people all over the world. So I think where you can make those in-person interactions possible, and where we have our large locations, we do encourage our employees, and our employees do appreciate going in 2 to 3 days a week. But the reality is that our footprint is expanding so rapidly, there could be areas where it's not feasible or even needed to have that brick and mortar office, right? So what I'm saying is that the in-person connection is very special, but make it so that you're trying to solve a real problem, and addressing the true shape and form of a modern working team that is in any way globally dispersed. And maybe the best model is hybrid for that team to come together.
Yeah. Well, I think those are all really great thoughts. And it's interesting. So like during the pandemic, lots of people realized, oh, I like this remote work thing, or I like this hybrid work thing. And especially younger people, young millennials, Gen Z workers were like, I really like this flexibility. I like this opportunity to work in my pajamas and work from my kitchen or whatever. But as
Yeah.
time went on, I think they also started to realize, oh, I'm missing out on some stuff. I'm missing out on the mentoring. I'm missing out on those organic interactions. And
Correct.
there's been a lot of survey data collected over the last couple of years showing that they do realize that there's some early career stuff that they're missing out on by only being at home. And so more and more, they're realizing that they need to be in the office at least some of the
Right.
time.
Right.
And so even younger workers are feeling like 100% remote all the time is probably not the best for them either. So
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
everyone is really kind of realizing that some form of hybrid, and that, that's different, I suppose, for everyone, and every organization has to figure out what that means. But like some form of hybrid is probably the better path. I guess the real answer is just flexibility. Like having some built-in flexibility is probably going to be ideal, and it's up to each organization to figure out what that looks like.
Right.
Something else you said though is really important, and that is you said like even when you're in office, in your example, when you're in office, you're still on Zoom 80% of the time, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm in office. I'm a professor. That's my main gig, and I do consulting work and I do other stuff on the side. And so
Right.
sometimes that's remote, sometimes that's in person, whatever. But as a professor, I could do stuff remote. I teach some online classes and stuff, but I'm really at the university. I'm in person most of the time. So
Right.
I would say 90% of the time I'm in person in my office, and a lot of other professors are too. But you know how much we interact with each other, even though like I could walk down the hall and I see all the other professors in their offices. Like we really don't actually interact all that much. Like every now and then we have meetings with each other, but
True.
mostly we're kind of in our
Very true.
offices doing our own thing. So
Yeah.
my point is, you can be in the office. You can have return to office mandates. You can have even hybrid days where like 3 or 4 days a week everyone has to be in the office, and you can
Right.
still have no interaction. You could still have
Absolutely.
everyone sitting in their office on Teams or on Zoom calls all day long, not
Absolutely.
interacting with each other. So if you're going to have return to office mandates, or you're going to have like mandated hybrid days where people are in the office, that alone is not going to necessarily do anything to bring about meaningful interaction. You have to be more intentional and more purposeful beyond that, beyond just proximity. You have to make sure that
Absolutely.
people have other ways that are really facilitating them to be together.
Absolutely.
Ways that are actually kind of forcing them to like interact with each other through collaborative brainstorming sessions or like work meetings or like other things that actually necessitate them being together, like physically in the same space, whether that's community
Yeah.
outreach stuff like you were talking about, whether that's some sort of collaborative meeting, whether that's whatever it may need to
Exactly.
look like. But just having
Absolutely.
people in the space together doesn't necessarily mean they're actually interacting. It doesn't necessarily mean they're actually doing anything together. And that's something I
Absolutely.
think leaders don't think about when they're saying we need to have return to office mandates.
Absolutely. I actually have a visual on how we are building the connectedness. Do you want me to just share it really quickly?
Sure. Yeah.
Let me see if I can bring it up. I was just looking at it. There we go. You need to let me share. Okay. All right. Can you see my
Yeah.
screen? So this is our overall model for, bringing people together, and we call our employees sentinels. So, engaging our sentinels. And at the very bottom, you see our core values that define, everything we do from an employee perspective. And then we have the goals, the intentional goal of fostering connection, encouraging well-being, promoting impact and empowerment. And then underneath each of those, we have 6 key pillars. So the first one is recognition. So a lot of our in-person experiences are actually awards where people come
Mhm.
together. So for instance, in Budapest, we have our Elevate program, which is our high potential leader learning program where people come together. We have an online peer-to-peer recognition system called Bravo, and then, some other awards and travel experiences as way of recognition. The second one is, just around well-being. So it is really looking at the needs of the modern family. is looking at the needs, the wellness needs of the modern knowledge worker. Then the next one is about belonging, and how do you create those inclusion networks where you're being very intentional about your diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we have different kinds. We have about 6 different inclusion networks, that promote belongingness in, across each of those areas. And we have our intranet, which is called S-Connect, which brings people together again on a technical platform. And then we love to celebrate milestones, right? So we have our anniversary program that celebrates key anniversaries. And, as you go higher up, we encourage people as an anniversary gift to travel to a Sentinel-1 office of your choice and meet with your colleagues in a different country or a different region. And then we talked about the S1 Cares program and S Foundation. We also have a cyber security awareness month coming up in October, where we will get into providing cyber safe learning for elementary and middle school children. And last but not the least, just providing that experience where we have a budget for remote employees to come together. If they're meeting their colleagues, they can actually expense up to a certain limit, drinks and dinner. And then we have, lots of different ways to empower teams to come together to build community. So that's how we, wrap our entire connection program by just being very thoughtful across, these 6 different pillars.
Yeah, I love that. That is such a great example. Divya, this has just been a great conversation. I note the time. I'm going to need to let you go so you can get on with your busy day. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Absolutely. I can be reached on LinkedIn, and our website, showcases a lot of our career opportunities. We're growing a lot, so definitely come in and talk to us. And I think I would encourage, this topic is not solved, right? So
Yeah.
even though we are saying hybrid is important, there are still a lot of questions that are left unanswered, like the early in career people, like, what is the real substitute for looking someone in the eye when you're meeting face to face, right? It's not always a Zoom meeting. So I think there are some questions that have been solved, but I think if we keep our focus towards what is the business problem we are trying to solve for versus, let's just do something for the sake of doing it. I think we should just be open and transparent about the fact that even though we think hybrid is the better way forward, there are a lot of questions that need to be solved. So I'm encouraging all of us to continue to think through this problem as we navigate our path forward, keeping the connection at the center of that problem, if you will.
Yeah, excellent. Divya, thank you so much. It's been a real
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for having
Encouraged.
me.
Yeah, I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Divya can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great